Welcome, fellow travelers of Middle-earth, to another mind-bending exploration here on Ringbearer, where we dig deeper into the mysteries that even the most devoted fans of Tolkien's world have never fully considered. Before we dive into tonight's revelation, I'd love to know where in this vast world you're joining our fellowship from, and what time of day finds you ready to have everything you thought you knew about Gandalf completely transformed, whether you're discovering these secrets during your morning routine in Japan, taking a midday break in Germany, or settling in for an evening of lore exploration somewhere in North America. You're part of something extraordinary here on Ringbearer, a community dedicated to uncovering the hidden depths of the Professor's most carefully guarded mysteries. Tonight, we're tackling a question that will fundamentally change how you see every single scene involving the Grey Pilgrim. Every moment where his actions seemed just a little too perfectly timed. Every instance where events worked out exactly as he needed them to, despite overwhelming odds against success. Did Gandalf possess a secret power so profound, so game-changing, that he deliberately concealed it from everyone around him, including his closest allies and most trusted friends? Think about all those moments throughout the Legendarium where Gandalf's success seemed to depend on incredible luck or perfect timing. The way he always arrived at exactly the right moment during crucial events. How he seemed to know things he shouldn't have known, predict outcomes that should have been impossible to foresee, and coordinate actions across vast distances without any apparent means of communication. Consider how often his plans relied on elements completely outside his control. Yet somehow everything aligned perfectly to produce the exact results he needed. The way eagles appeared just when rescue was most desperate. How Gollum happened to be in exactly the right place at Mount Doom. The timing of Aragorn's arrival at Helm's Deep. The coordination of the Rohirrim at Pelennor Fields. The sequence of events that led Frodo to Rivendell. We've been told that Gandalf was wise, that he was patient, that he understood the deeper patterns of how events unfolded in Middle-earth. But what if his success wasn't based on wisdom and patience alone? What if he possessed capabilities so extraordinary that revealing them would have fundamentally altered how every other character related to him and his mission? The evidence has been hiding in plain sight throughout Tolkien's writings, scattered through seemingly unrelated incidents and casual observations that take on completely different meaning when viewed from the right perspective. Hints about abilities that went far beyond what we saw him display openly. Powers that would explain not just his effectiveness, but his absolute confidence in plans that should have been impossible to execute successfully. What we're about to explore goes beyond the conventional understanding of what the Istari were sent to Middle-earth to accomplish. This isn't about his obvious abilities with light and fire, his skill with a sword, or his authority over certain creatures. We're talking about capabilities so fundamental to the nature of reality itself, that their existence would explain mysteries that have puzzled readers for decades. Hidden within Tolkien's most subtle descriptions, buried in throwaway comments and seemingly insignificant details, lies evidence of a power that would make Gandalf not just a wise counselor or skilled wizard, but something approaching a force of nature, operating according to rules that other beings couldn't even perceive, much less understand. We're about to discover why the Valar chose him specifically for this mission, why Sauron feared him above all other enemies, and why his apparent limitations were actually carefully maintained illusions, designed to hide capabilities that would have changed the entire nature of the struggle between light and darkness. So prepare yourself for revelations that will transform every scene you've ever read involving Gandalf the Grey. Here with us on Ringbearer where the deepest mysteries of Middle-earth finally reveal their secrets. The first and perhaps most subtle of Gandalf's hidden powers was his ability to influence the fundamental probabilities that governed events throughout Middle-earth, creating what appeared to be extraordinary luck, but was actually precise manipulation of chance itself. This wasn't random fortune or divine intervention, but deliberate alteration of statistical outcomes that ensured crucial events unfolded exactly as his mission required. Consider the seemingly impossible chain of coincidences that brought Bilbo to Gollum's cave during the quest for Erebor. A hobbit who had never been underground in his life somehow wandered through miles of goblin tunnels, avoided dozens of potential wrong turns, and ended up in the one chamber where the ring lay waiting. The odds against such navigation were astronomical. Yet Gandalf showed no surprise when Bilbo emerged with his precious discovery. This pattern repeats throughout every major event in which Gandalf was involved. The timing of his arrival at critical moments wasn't the result of fortunate coincidence, but careful orchestration of probability fields that ensured he would be exactly where he needed to be when circumstances reached their crucial points. During the Fellowship's journey, observe how often dangers that should have been fatal somehow resolved themselves in ways that served Gandalf's larger purposes. The avalanche on the Red Horn Pass could have buried them all, but it created exactly the conditions needed to force the company toward Moria, where events essential to the mission's success would unfold. Even his apparent setbacks served strategic purposes that suggest manipulation rather than accident. His capture by Saruman at Orthanc occurred at precisely the moment when his visible absence from events would force other players to take actions they might not have attempted with his guidance available. The mechanism behind this probability manipulation operated through subtle influence over what Tolkien described as the music of creation itself. By understanding the deep harmonies that governed chance and possibility, Gandalf could introduce minor adjustments that cascaded into major changes in outcome, while maintaining the appearance of natural development. This power required extraordinary restraint and precision in its application. Too much manipulation would have created obvious artificial patterns that other powers, particularly Sauron, would have detected and countered. The key was making adjustments so small and subtle that they appeared to be natural variations in the normal flow of events. Gandalf's famous luck in arriving just when rescue was most needed wasn't luck at all, but the result of probability fields carefully maintained around key individuals and locations. He didn't rush to save people at the last moment. He ensured that danger would peak at exactly the moment when his intervention would have maximum impact. This explains his uncanny ability to coordinate complex plans that depended on precise timing across vast distances without apparent communication. He wasn't predicting when other players would act. He was subtly influencing the probabilities that determined when they would feel compelled to make crucial decisions. The eagle's timely arrivals, the perfect coordination of battles, the way seemingly random encounters served essential purposes, all point to someone with the power to stack the deck in favor of outcomes that served the greater good. The second hidden aspect of Gandalf's true power lay in his connection to what he called the secret fire, a divine flame that went far beyond the dramatic confrontation with the Balrog in Moria. This wasn't simply a weapon he could summon in moments of desperate need, but a fundamental aspect of his being that influenced every action he took and every word he spoke throughout his incarnation in Middle-earth. The secret fire represented the creative force of Eru Ilúvatar himself, the divine spark that had brought all things into existence during the music of creation. Most beings in Middle-earth could sense this power occasionally, feel its presence during moments of great beauty or profound significance, but Gandalf maintained constant access to it, drawing upon its energy not just for spectacular displays of magic, but for the subtle work of inspiration and renewal that formed the core of his mission. This connection manifested most obviously in his ability to kindle literal flames that burned with properties no ordinary fire possessed. His staff could ignite torches that never guttered in wind or rain, create barriers of light that repelled creatures whose nature was fundamentally opposed to creation itself, and generate warmth that restored both body and spirit in ways that went beyond mere physical comfort. But the deeper applications of this power were far more significant than these visible effects. Every word Gandalf spoke carried traces of the secret fire, imbuing his speech with authority that transcended normal persuasion. When he counseled doubt-ridden leaders or encouraged frightened companions, he wasn't relying solely on wisdom and experience, but channeling the very force that had spoken reality into existence. This explains why his presence alone could transform the atmosphere of any gathering, why his arrival at crucial moments seemed to shift the entire emotional tenor of events. People didn't just feel better because Gandalf was there. They felt the touch of the divine creative force itself, experienced at some unconscious level the presence of the power that had made their own existence possible. The secret fire also provided him with insight that went beyond conventional knowledge or logical deduction. By maintaining connection to the source of all creation, he could perceive the underlying patterns that connected seemingly unrelated events, understand the deeper purposes that guided the unfolding of history, and recognize the moments when individual choices would have consequences, extending far beyond their immediate circumstances. His famous patience wasn't simply the product of long experience, but reflected his ability to perceive time itself from the perspective of eternal creation. The secret fire existed outside the normal flow of temporal progression, allowing him to understand events from the viewpoint of their ultimate, rather than immediate, significance. Most remarkably, this connection allowed him to share aspects of the secret fire with others during moments of greatest need. The courage that appeared in hearts that had known only despair, the sudden clarity that came to minds overwhelmed by confusion, the strength that emerged when all physical resources had been exhausted, all represented touches of the divine flame that Gandalf could kindle in others when circumstances demanded such intervention. This power remained hidden because its full revelation would have fundamentally altered how every other being related to him and his mission throughout Middle-earth. The third aspect of Gandalf's concealed abilities was perhaps the most profound: his capacity to perceive the actual threads of fate that bound all events together and, more importantly, his power to make subtle adjustments to these cosmic patterns when the greater good demanded such intervention. This wasn't fortune-telling or simple prediction, but direct interaction with the fundamental forces that determined how destiny itself would unfold. Tolkien's cosmology established that certain events were woven into the very fabric of creation from the moment the music began, predetermined outcomes that would occur regardless of individual choices or circumstance. But the professor also understood that between these fixed points lay infinite possibilities for variation, moments where the threads of fate remained flexible enough to be influenced by those with sufficient knowledge and power. Gandalf possessed the ability to perceive these threads as visible, tangible realities rather than abstract concepts. He could see the golden chords that connected past actions to future consequences. Observe the dark strands that bound characters to tragic outcomes, and most importantly, identify the crucial moments where these patterns remained malleable enough to be redirected. This explains his uncanny ability to make predictions that seemed impossible given the information available to him. When he spoke of future events with absolute certainty, he wasn't guessing or hoping but describing outcomes he could literally observe, woven into the cosmic tapestry. His famous statement that Gollum still had a part to play wasn't wishful thinking but recognition of destiny threads that remained incomplete. More significantly, Gandalf could make surgical alterations to these fate patterns when circumstances absolutely required such intervention. The process demanded incredible precision and restraint, since major changes to predetermined outcomes could create catastrophic disruptions throughout the entire cosmic order. But minor adjustments, carefully applied at exactly the right moments, could redirect entire chains of causation while maintaining the appearance of natural development. The key was identifying what Tolkien called fate nexus points, moments where multiple destiny threads converged, and small changes could produce enormous alterations in ultimate outcomes. Gandalf spent centuries learning to recognize these critical junctures and developing the techniques needed to influence them without creating obvious, artificial interference. His decision to involve Bilbo in the quest for Erebor exemplifies this process perfectly. By introducing one seemingly minor change to the expedition's composition, he created alterations in the fate threads that would eventually lead to Sauron's destruction decades later. The Hobbit's participation wasn't random inspiration, but carefully calculated intervention at a crucial nexus point. This power required him to bear the terrible burden of knowing multiple possible futures simultaneously, understanding the full consequences of every choice, while maintaining the appearance of uncertainty that allowed others to exercise genuine free will in their decision-making. His occasional moments of apparent doubt weren't genuine uncertainty about outcomes, but the weight of choosing between different destiny paths when multiple options remained viable. The fourth hidden capability that Gandalf possessed was his ability to subtly influence how others perceived reality and what they chose to remember from their experiences with him. This wasn't crude mind control or obvious magical manipulation, but delicate adjustments to consciousness that allowed him to guide understanding and recollection in ways that served his larger mission without violating the essential free will of those he encountered. This power manifested most clearly in how people recalled their conversations with Gandalf after he departed. Companions would find themselves remembering his words with unusual clarity weeks or months later, often discovering new layers of meaning in advice that had seemed simple when originally given. More subtly, Gandalf could influence what aspects of their encounters people chose to focus on and discuss with others. Strategic information that needed to remain private would slip from conscious attention, while crucial insights that required wider distribution would stick in memory with unusual persistence. This selective influence over recollection allowed him to share different levels of truth with different individuals, while maintaining perfect consistency in his overall message. His conversations with political leaders demonstrate this capability most clearly. Kings and stewards would emerge from private meetings with Gandalf, carrying impressions and motivations that served larger strategic purposes, yet they remained convinced that their decisions stemmed entirely from their own reasoning and judgment. The wisdom they gained felt completely natural and self-generated rather than externally imposed. This extends to his ability to alter how people perceived his own nature and capabilities during their interactions. When circumstances required him to appear as nothing more than a wandering conjurer, observers would focus on his staff tricks and fireworks, while overlooking demonstrations of power that should have revealed his true status. When situations demanded respect for his authority, the same individuals would perceive depth and majesty that commanded immediate deference. The mechanism behind this influence operated through what could be called resonance with the music of creation that existed within every conscious mind. By attuning himself to these deeper harmonies, Gandalf could emphasize certain mental frequencies while dampening others, creating shifts in perception and memory that felt completely natural to those experiencing them. The wisdom he shared didn't fade with time, but grew more relevant and insightful as circumstances developed, as if his words contained seeds that bloomed in memory exactly when their guidance was most needed. This power proved essential for maintaining his cover as one of the Istari while accomplishing objectives that required capabilities far beyond what his role was supposed to encompass. He could demonstrate extraordinary knowledge or abilities when necessary, then ensure that witnesses remembered only what was appropriate for them to know and share with others. The ethical implications of this capability were profound, which explains why Gandalf used it with extreme restraint, and only when the stakes justified such intervention in others' consciousness. The fifth aspect of Gandalf's concealed power was his ability to maintain instantaneous communication across the vast distances of Middle-earth, coordinating complex operations and sharing crucial information without relying on any of the conventional methods available to other beings. This wasn't telepathy in the crude sense of reading minds, but something far more sophisticated. Direct connection to a network of consciousness that transcended physical limitations entirely. This capability explains how Gandalf consistently demonstrated knowledge of events occurring hundreds of miles away, often with details that no messenger system could have provided in the time available. His awareness of developments in distant kingdoms, his understanding of troop movements he couldn't possibly have observed, and his ability to coordinate timing across multiple theaters of operation, all point to communication methods that operated outside normal constraints of space and time. The mechanism behind this power involved tapping into what Tolkien conceived as the underlying consciousness that connected all living things in Middle-earth. Every tree, every stream, every creature, great and small, participated in a vast network of awareness that most beings could only sense dimly during moments of deep communion with nature. But Gandalf had learned to access this network directly, using it as a communication system that spanned continents. Through this connection, he could perceive events as they unfolded anywhere within Middle-earth's borders, experiencing them through the consciousness of local plants and animals who witnessed what transpired in their vicinity. A murder of crows could serve as his eyes above a distant battlefield, while ancient trees could provide him with detailed knowledge of conversations held beneath their branches. More remarkably, this network allowed him to influence the behavior of creatures throughout Middle-earth. When circumstances demanded such coordination, the eagle's perfectly timed arrivals weren't coincidences, but responses to communications sent through channels that bypassed normal limitations of distance and time. Similarly, the movements of other animals that proved crucial to various rescue operations represented coordinated responses to messages transmitted through the natural consciousness network. This communication system also extended to willing participants among the various free peoples, though they remained largely unaware of their role in the process. Individuals with strong connections to the natural world could unconsciously receive and relay information through the same network, creating an intelligence system that operated beneath the level of conscious awareness. Gandalf's ability to appear at exactly the right moment during crucial events wasn't the result of fortunate timing, but precise coordination enabled by his access to this communication network. He knew when and where his intervention would be needed, because he could monitor developing situations in real time, regardless of physical distance. The network also allowed him to influence the timing of others' decisions by sharing subtle impressions and emotional impulses that encouraged action at precisely the right moments, creating the appearance of miraculous coordination without revealing the communication system that made such precision possible. The sixth hidden power that Gandalf wielded was his capacity to literally ignite hope and courage within the hearts of others, not through inspiring words or noble example alone, but through direct transmission of spiritual energy that could transform despair into determination at the most fundamental level of consciousness. This wasn't psychological encouragement, but actual alteration of emotional and spiritual states through mystical intervention. This ability manifested most clearly during moments when all seemed lost, when rational assessment of circumstances offered no grounds for optimism, yet Gandalf's presence somehow created renewed determination to continue fighting against impossible odds. The transformation wasn't gradual or subtle, but immediate and profound, as if a flame had been kindled in souls that had grown cold with fear and hopelessness. The mechanism behind this power operated through direct sharing of what could only be described as spiritual fire, a form of divine energy that existed independently of physical circumstances or logical evaluation of chances for success. Gandalf could transfer portions of his own inner flame to others when their need became desperate enough to justify such intervention. During the siege of Minas Tirith, observers noted how soldiers who had been ready to abandon their posts found themselves filled with inexplicable courage after brief encounters with the White Wizard. Men who had been paralyzed by terror discovered strength they didn't know they possessed, not because circumstances had improved, but because something essential within their nature had been awakened or restored. This wasn't temporary emotional manipulation that would fade when reality reasserted itself, but permanent alteration of spiritual capacity that enabled recipients to maintain hope and courage even when facing continued adversity. The flame once kindled would continue burning, sustaining those who had received it through trials that would have broken them before such intervention. The power extended beyond individual encounters to influence entire groups simultaneously when circumstances demanded mass restoration of morale. Gandalf could project waves of spiritual energy that swept through assembled crowds, transforming collective despair into shared determination, without anyone understanding exactly how their emotional state had changed so dramatically. Most remarkably, this ability could operate across distances, allowing him to kindle hope in allies who were facing their own desperate situations far from his physical location. The sudden surge of courage that Aragorn's company experienced during their darkest moments, the renewed determination that came to defenders of various strongholds at crucial times, all represented remote applications of this supernatural gift. The ethical implications of directly altering others' emotional states were profound, which explains why Gandalf reserved this power for moments of genuine crisis, when hope had been entirely extinguished through natural means. He understood that courage imposed from outside had less value than courage developed through experience, but he also recognized that some situations required intervention to prevent the complete collapse of resistance against darkness. This power revealed why his mere presence on battlefields could shift the tide of entire conflicts, transforming routed armies into effective fighting forces through spiritual influence that operated independently of tactical or strategic considerations. The seventh concealed aspect of Gandalf's extraordinary abilities was his power to make subtle adjustments to the flow of time itself within localized areas, creating temporal advantages that appeared completely natural while providing crucial seconds or minutes that could determine the outcome of critical situations. This wasn't dramatic time manipulation, but precise alterations to duration and pacing that gave him the edge needed to accomplish seemingly impossible tasks. This temporal influence operated on such a small scale that observers never consciously noticed the adjustments. Yet the cumulative effect of these minor changes could transform entire encounters. A conversation that felt like it lasted mere minutes to participants might actually have extended for much longer, giving Gandalf the opportunity to plant ideas and gather information that wouldn't have been possible within normal timeframes. During his famous encounter with Bilbo over the ring's departure, the argument that seemed to resolve quickly from the Hobbit's perspective actually unfolded across a much more extended period in real time. Gandalf stretched those crucial moments, giving himself the temporal space needed to work through Bilbo's resistance, without creating the impression of prolonged conflict that might have alerted neighbors or created lasting resentment. This ability proved particularly valuable during combat situations where split-second timing meant the difference between victory and defeat. Gandalf could slow his perception of rapidly unfolding events while accelerating his own movements within the altered time stream, creating the appearance of supernatural reflexes and tactical brilliance that was actually precise temporal manipulation. The mechanism behind this power involved accessing the same fundamental forces that governed the passage of time throughout Middle-earth, making microscopic adjustments to local temporal flow without creating disturbances that would be detected by other powerful beings. The changes had to remain within natural variation limits to avoid triggering defensive responses from entities capable of perceiving temporal manipulation. His ability to arrive at exactly the right moment during crucial events wasn't just superior timing but active compression of the temporal distance between his starting point and his destination. What appeared to be impossibly rapid travel was actually movement through slightly accelerated time streams that allowed him to cover greater distances in less subjective time. During planning sessions with leaders throughout Middle-earth, Gandalf could extend the subjective duration of their meetings while maintaining normal external time flow, allowing for much more detailed strategic discussions than would have been possible within the constraints of busy political schedules. Participants would emerge feeling they had covered enormous amounts of ground in remarkably efficient sessions. This temporal manipulation also enabled him to create pockets of extended duration during moments of crisis, giving others additional time to make crucial decisions or complete essential tasks without the external world progressing at normal speed. The extra moments that heroes found during desperate situations often represented Gandalf's temporal intervention operating at the edge of detectability. The power required extraordinary precision and restraint, since larger temporal disruptions could create paradoxes or attract unwanted attention from forces that monitored the integrity of time's passage throughout Middle-earth. The eighth hidden aspect of Gandalf's true capabilities reveals perhaps the most shocking truth about his apparent death in Khazad-dûm. His resurrection wasn't an emergency intervention, by the Valar, but the activation of a power he had possessed throughout his entire incarnation in Middle-earth. The ability to return from death was always available to him, making his sacrifice in Moria a calculated strategic decision rather than a desperate last stand. This power stemmed from his unique status among the Istari, the Grand Wizards, a special dispensation granted before his original departure from Valinor, but kept hidden even from his fellow kind, while Saruman, Radagast, and the Blue Wizards were bound by the normal limitations of incarnate life. Gandalf carried within his spiritual essence the capacity to transcend death. When circumstances absolutely demanded such intervention, the mechanism operated through his connection to the timeless realm beyond Middle-earth's physical boundaries, allowing his consciousness to step outside the normal cycle of mortality, while retaining the ability to return to incarnate form. This wasn't simple healing or restoration, but actual traversal of the boundary between life and death, with full retention of memory and purpose. Gandalf's decision to finally use this power at Moria was driven by strategic considerations that had been developing for decades. He recognized that his transformation from grey to white would provide exactly the enhancement of authority and capability needed for the final phase of the mission. But the change required the dramatic circumstances of death and return to be accepted by those who would witness it. The timing was crucial for multiple reasons beyond personal transformation. His temporary absence from events forced other key players to take actions they might not have attempted with his guidance available, creating the precise sequence of developments needed for ultimate success. Aragorn's assumption of leadership, the Fellowship's division into separate paths, even Frodo's decision to continue alone, all resulted from the gap his death created. More significantly, his return as Gandalf the White eliminated the last restrictions that had limited his ability to act directly against Sauron's forces. The resurrection provided him with enhanced power, while simultaneously giving him the moral authority needed to take more aggressive action, without violating the Istari's original mandate of guidance rather than domination. This explains his absolute confidence in plans that seemed to depend entirely on his survival of the Balrog encounter. He wasn't hoping for miraculous rescue or divine intervention, but executing a strategy that had always included his temporary death as a necessary component. The revelation that he possessed this power throughout his earlier adventures casts new light on countless situations where his survival seemed to depend on extraordinary luck or perfect timing. He wasn't being protected by fortune, but making calculated decisions about when to risk apparent death because he knew such risks weren't actually final. His resurrection power remained hidden because its revelation would have fundamentally altered how everyone else approached dangerous situations, potentially creating reckless behavior based on false assumptions about similar protections being available to others. The ninth secret power that Gandalf possessed was his ability to instantly inspire absolute loyalty and devotion from any living creature he encountered, regardless of species, temperament, or previous allegiances. This wasn't mere animal friendship or natural charisma, but a supernatural capacity to awaken the deepest protective instincts within any conscious being and direct those impulses toward serving his mission. This ability manifested most dramatically with creatures that had no logical reason to assist him or his companions. The eagles who repeatedly appeared at moments of desperate need weren't responding to old friendships or political alliances, but to a compulsion that operated at levels far deeper than conscious decision-making. When Gandalf called upon them, they experienced an overwhelming need to provide aid, that transcended their own safety concerns or territorial preferences. The power worked through direct appeal to what Tolkien understood as the fundamental loyalty that all created beings possessed toward the forces of creation itself. Every living creature carried within its essential nature a connection to the divine source from which it had emerged, and Gandalf could activate this connection to generate immediate and absolute devotion to his cause. This explains his remarkable success with creatures that others found dangerous or impossible to manage. Shadowfax's submission wasn't gradual trust building, but instant recognition of absolute authority that the great horse felt compelled to acknowledge. Similarly, his ability to calm hostile animals or gain cooperation from creatures in the wild stemmed from this power to awaken their deepest instincts for service to higher purposes. The mechanism operated through resonance with the music of creation that existed within every living consciousness, allowing Gandalf to harmonize his own spiritual frequency with theirs in ways that created irresistible bonds of loyalty. Creatures who experienced this resonance felt they were encountering the voice of creation itself, speaking through Gandalf's presence. This power extended beyond obvious animal allies to influence even beings with complex motivations and independent agendas. His ability to gain cooperation from individuals who should have been suspicious of his motives or resistant to his influence often resulted from subtle activation of this loyalty commanding capability, rather than conventional persuasion. The most remarkable aspect of this power was its universal applicability. Size, intelligence, previous conditioning, even inherent hostility toward his mission. None of these factors could override the fundamental response that his presence triggered in any living consciousness. From the smallest forest creatures to the mightiest eagles, all were susceptible to the loyalty compulsion when he chose to activate it. Gandalf used this ability with extreme restraint, understanding that widespread knowledge of such power would create fear and resentment among those who valued their independence. Most of those who aided him remained unaware that their decisions weren't entirely their own, believing instead that they had chosen to help based on their own judgment and inclinations. This power revealed why his network of allies extended so broadly across Middle-earth's various species and cultures, creating the vast coordination system that made his mission's success possible. The 10th, and perhaps most fundamental of Gandalf's hidden powers, was his knowledge of the true names that lay at the heart of every created thing in Middle-earth. The secret words of power that had been spoken during the music of creation to bring each element of reality into being. This wasn't academic knowledge or scholarly research, but direct access to the original language of creation itself. In Tolkien's cosmology, everything that existed possessed a true name that defined its essential nature and governed its relationship to the larger patterns of reality. These weren't the common names that different peoples used in their various languages, but the fundamental words that had called each thing forth from the void during the world's making. Knowledge of these true names granted absolute authority over the things they defined. When Gandalf spoke the true name of fire, flames responded not because he commanded them, but because he was speaking the very word that had created their nature in the first place. When he addressed the Balrog as a servant of shadow, he wasn't issuing a challenge, but stating a fundamental truth about its essence that it could not deny or resist. This power manifested most clearly in his ability to command natural forces and compel obedience from creatures that should have been beyond his influence. His mastery over elements like wind and water wasn't magical manipulation, but direct communication with these forces using the language they were created to obey. The true names also revealed the hidden connections that linked all things together, allowing Gandalf to perceive the underlying unity that made coordinated action across vast distances possible. By understanding how different elements of creation were related through their original naming, he could influence one thing by speaking to its connected counterparts elsewhere. His knowledge extended to the true names of abstract concepts as well as physical objects, giving him power over qualities like courage, despair, loyalty, and betrayal. When he kindled hope in others or dispelled fear from their hearts, he was speaking directly to these emotions, using the words that had originally defined their nature. Most significantly, Gandalf knew the true names of every individual he encountered, understanding not just who they were, but what they were meant to become according to the original design of creation. This knowledge allowed him to speak to the deepest potential within each person, awakening capabilities and virtues that even they didn't know they possessed. This power remained absolutely secret, because its revelation would have fundamentally altered the relationship between Gandalf and every other being in Middle-earth. To know that someone possessed the true names of all things was to understand that they held ultimate authority over reality itself, a knowledge that would have created either paralyzing fear or dangerous dependency among those he was sent to guide. His restraint in using this power demonstrated perhaps the greatest wisdom of all, understanding that true authority lay not in compelling obedience through knowledge of secret names, but in inspiring others to discover their own true names and the power that came with that self-knowledge. And so we reach the end of our exploration into the most carefully guarded secret in all of Middle-earth, where we've discovered that Gandalf the Grey was never simply a wise old wizard with a staff and some fire tricks, but something approaching a force of nature operating with capabilities that would have fundamentally changed every relationship and every conflict if their true extent had been revealed. The 10 hidden powers we've uncovered tonight weave together into a tapestry of abilities so comprehensive that they transform our understanding of how the entire War of the Ring unfolded. His manipulation of probability and luck, his deep connection to the secret fire, his ability to see and alter fate itself, his power over memory and perception, his instant communication across vast distances, his supernatural gift for kindling hope, his subtle control over time's flow, his resurrection capability that predated Moria, his command over any living creature, and his knowledge of the true names that governed all existence. What emerges from this revelation is perhaps the most profound lesson about power and responsibility ever embedded in fantasy literature. Gandalf possessed capabilities that could have ended the conflict with Sauron in days rather than years, could have prevented countless deaths and suffering, could have imposed his will upon Middle-earth with absolute authority that no force could have resisted. Yet he chose restraint at every crucial moment, understanding that victories won through overwhelming power would have been hollow achievements that robbed others of the growth and self-discovery that came through facing challenges with their own strength. His greatest wisdom lay not in knowing how to use these abilities, but in knowing when not to use them. The secrecy surrounding his true nature wasn't deception, but the ultimate expression of love for the peoples he had been sent to serve. By appearing as nothing more than a helpful guide with unusual but limited capabilities, he enabled others to become the heroes of their own stories, rather than mere witnesses to his demonstration of divine power. His hidden abilities reveal why the Valar chose him specifically for this mission above all other candidates. They needed someone with the power to ensure ultimate success if circumstances became truly desperate. But more importantly, they needed someone with the wisdom and self-restraint to achieve victory through inspiration rather than domination. Gandalf's true secret wasn't the extent of his power, but his absolute commitment to using it only in service of others' growth and freedom. In concealing his greatest capabilities, he revealed his greatest strength, the understanding that real victory comes not from what we can accomplish through force, but from what we can inspire others to achieve through their own courage and determination. Thank you for joining us on this mind-bending journey of discovery, fellow travelers. Here on Ringbearer, we've seen that even our deepest assumptions about beloved characters can be transformed. When we look beneath the surface of the stories we thought we knew completely,